There was once a girl who entered the most dangerous palace in the world, with a wide smile and no idea whatsoever of what awaited her. Her name was Catherine Howard. She was young, pretty, full of joy, and had no idea that the powerful men surrounding her were already using her as a chess piece on a board. She did not choose this life. She was chosen for it. And by the time she understood exactly what kind of world she had been placed in, it was already too late to find a way out. To understand Catherine's story, you have to understand the world she was born into. England in the 1500s was not a place where ordinary people, and especially not young women, had much say in what happened to them. Your family decided your future. Your name and your blood determined your worth. And if it happened that you were young and pretty and related to someone powerful, then you became something that was negotiated, positioned, and used. Catherine Howard was all of that. She was also, by all accounts, a warm and lively girl who loved dancing, laughing, and enjoying the small pleasures life offered her. None of that would be enough to save her. Her uncle was Thomas Howard, the Duke of Norfolk, one of the most important and ambitious men in all of England. He was the kind of man who woke up every morning thinking about power, who had it, who was losing it, and how he could get more of it for himself and his family. He had already sent a niece close to the king years before. That niece was Anne Boleyn, and for a time, the plan had worked brilliantly. Anne had become queen. The Howards had risen higher than ever, but Anne was gone now, executed on charges that many people even at the time whispered were fabricated, and the family needed to find a way back into royal favor. When Thomas Howard looked at his young niece Catherine and saw her youth, her beauty, and her natural charm, he saw an opportunity. He did not see a girl. He saw a move on the board, so he sent her to court. He dressed her well and placed her where the right people would notice her, and he waited. He did not tell her what she was getting into. He did not warn her about the dangers of a court where people smiled at your face while sharpening knives behind your back. He simply sent her and trusted that nature would take its course. It did, just not in the way anyone might have expected. Now King Henry VIII was not the man he had once been. There was a time, not many years before, when Henry was considered the finest prince in all of Europe. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with reddish gold hair and a laugh that filled whatever room he entered. He spoke several languages, played musical instruments beautifully, loved to hunt, joust, and dance, and carried himself with the kind of confidence that made people believe he had been born to sit on a throne. Which, of course, he had. In his younger years, being in the same room as Henry VIII felt like standing next to the sun, warm and bright and almost too dazzling to look at directly. But that king had slowly disappeared over the decades. By the time Catherine arrived at court, Henry was nearly 50 years old, and the years had not been kind to him. He was enormously heavy, so much so that on his bad days he could barely walk without assistance. His leg bore a wound, a deep and terrible ulcer that had never healed properly, causing him constant pain and producing a smell that those around him had to learn to ignore if they wanted to keep their positions. His moods had become unpredictable and frightening. He could be warm and generous and full of affection one moment, and then something would shift in his eyes and suddenly the room felt dangerous in a way that was hard to explain but impossible to ignore. He had been through 4 marriages. His first wife, Catherine of Aragon, he had cast aside after years of bitter conflict that had changed the entire religious structure of England. His second wife, Anne Boleyn, had been executed. His third wife, Jane Seymour, had died after giving birth to his only son. His fourth wife, a German princess named Anne of Cleves, had been arranged by his chief minister and had turned out to be such a personal disaster for Henry that the moment he first saw her, he had wanted to turn around and go home. He had gone through with the marriage because he had no choice, but he had been furious about it, and the union had been annulled as quickly as humanly possible. Henry was tired, humiliated, in pain, and deeply lonely. He felt like a man whom life had somehow failed, which was a remarkable feeling for someone who had everything and had taken even more. And then, in the midst of all that misery and frustration, Catherine Howard entered his field of vision. Something happened to Henry when he saw her. People who were there described it in ways that sounded almost like watching a man wake from a long sleep. His eyes changed. His whole posture changed. She made him laugh in a way that seemed to surprise even him. She was bright and warm and moved through a room like someone who genuinely enjoyed being alive, and that kind of energy is magnetic under any circumstances. But for a man in Henry's condition, it must have felt like being handed a glass of cold water in the middle of a desert. He began paying attention to her in the way a king pays attention, which meant everyone else noticed immediately. Gifts began arriving for Catherine. Jewels that caught the light and made the other ladies stare. Fine fabrics and expensive clothes that set her apart as someone special, someone chosen. For Catherine, who had not grown up with much luxury, comfort, or protection, this attention must have been completely overwhelming. A king, the most powerful man in the country, perhaps in all of Europe, thought she was wonderful. He could not take his eyes off her. He called her his rose without a thorn. He said it as though he believed it with every part of himself, and for a brief and brilliant moment, perhaps he did. They married in the summer of 1540, just weeks after his marriage to Anne of Cleves was officially dissolved. Henry was 49. Catherine was somewhere between 15 and 17, though no one recorded her exact date of birth, which tells you something about how much importance was placed on the lives of young girls at that time. The gap between them was enormous in every possible sense. But Henry did not see it as a gap. He saw it as a blessing. He genuinely believed this young laughing girl was the happiness he had been waiting for. What Henry did not know, or perhaps what he chose not to examine too closely, was that Catherine had a past. And in the world she now lived in, a past was not merely a personal matter. It was a weapon that other people could pick up and use against you. Before the palace, before the silk dresses and jewels and the title of queen, Catherine had grown up in a very different kind of place. After her mother died when she was young, she had been sent to live in the household of her step-grandmother, the Dowager Duchess of Norfolk. It sounds grand when you say it like that, but the reality was far less impressive. The household was large, crowded, and poorly supervised. The kind of place where the adults in charge did not pay close enough attention to what the young people in their care were actually doing. Girls slept together in shared rooms, and once the lights went out, the rules seemed to go out with them. It was in this environment that Catherine, still very young and with no one truly watching out for her, first encountered the darker side of a world that offered her no protection. Her music teacher, a man named Henry Mannix, took advantage of his position of authority in ways that were entirely inappropriate and entirely wrong. The adults who should have been looking out for her were nowhere to be found. What unfolded was not something Catherine chose or invited. She was a child, unguarded and without guidance, and the people responsible for her well-being either failed to notice what was happening or chose to look the other way. Later, when she was slightly older but still very young, Catherine became involved with a young man named Francis Derham, who also lived in the Duchess's household. This was different from what had happened with Mannix. Derham was closer to her in age, and there were genuine feelings between them, at least on the surface. They were reckless and foolish in the way young people sometimes are when no one is watching them properly. Derham would later claim they had made a private promise to each other, something that, in those days, carried almost the same weight as an actual engagement. Whether that was true, or simply something he said to protect himself later, is difficult to know. What was true was that people in that household had seen things and heard things and kept them locked away in their memories, waiting for the right moment to use them. Catherine arrived at court carrying all of this without fully understanding how dangerous it was. She was not a sophisticated political operator like some of the other women around the king. She had not been trained for this. She had been launched into it with a smile and a pretty face and left to manage on her own. As queen, Catherine genuinely seemed to enjoy some parts of her new life. She loved music and dancing, and Henry made sure there was plenty of both. She was generous and kind to the people around her, and many of those people sincerely liked her. But she also made decisions during her time as queen that, looking back, break your heart. Because you can see exactly where they lead, even though she could not. She allowed Francis Derham to come and join her household. She gave him the position of her personal secretary. People watching this shook their heads quietly, because bringing a man from your past into your household as Queen of England was exactly the kind of thing that gave your enemies something to work with. Why she did it is not entirely clear. Perhaps she felt she owed him something. Perhaps she thought it was safer to have him close where she could watch him, rather than leaving him out there with his secrets in his head. Perhaps she simply did not think it through. Whatever the reason, it was a serious mistake. And then there was Thomas Culpeper. Culpeper was one of the king's personal attendants, a young man who was constantly around Henry and had the king's genuine affection and trust. He was also young, charming, and handsome in the way courtiers sometimes were. The kind of man who seemed to light up a room simply by walking into it. He and Catherine had known each other before her marriage, and when they found themselves in the same court, something between them ignited. It is impossible to know exactly what Catherine felt for Culpeper, or what he felt for her, because everything we have from that time was recorded under circumstances that were the opposite of honesty, interrogations where the wrong answer could get you killed. But there are letters. One letter in particular, written by Catherine to Culpeper, is one of the most heartbreaking documents from that entire period. She wrote to him with a warmth and urgency that does not feel like the careful writing of someone playing political games. It feels like a real person with real feelings that she could not contain. She calls him her little sweet fool. She says she wishes she could be with him. She writes with the kind of longing that makes you sad before you have even finished reading. They began meeting in secret. A woman named Jane Boleyn, who was one of Catherine's ladies at court and who had her own complicated and turbulent history, arranged the encounters. They would meet late at night, slipping away from where they were supposed to be, stealing time in back corridors and private rooms. How far things went between Catherine and Culpeper in those stolen moments, no one can say with certainty even now. Both of them, when later interrogated, insisted that nothing beyond conversation had occurred. But in Henry VIII's court, the line between emotional betrayal and physical betrayal was so thin it barely existed. A queen belonged entirely to the king. Her heart, her attention, her smiles were not hers to give away. And Catherine had been giving all of those things to someone else. The autumn of 1541 should have been a moment of triumph. Henry had taken Catherine on a grand royal tour of the northern parts of England, a journey meant to show the country his new queen, and let Henry display his happiness to his people. He was in better spirits than he had been in years. He believed, or wanted to believe, that things were finally going well for him. And then a letter arrived. A man named John Lascelles had come forward with information. His sister Mary had once lived in the same household as Catherine when they were young, and she had told her brother things about Manox and Derham, things Catherine would have given anything to keep buried. Lascelles had brought this information to Thomas Cranmer, the Archbishop of Canterbury, who was a careful and cautious man and not quite brave enough to walk up to the king and say it to his face. Instead, he wrote it all down and placed the note where Henry would find it during his private prayers. Henry read the letter. He read it again, and then, according to the people who were present, the King of England began to cry. Not silent tears, real, shaking, desperate sobs, the kind that seemed to come from somewhere very deep in a person. Henry wept in a way that left those around him stunned, because they had rarely, if ever, seen him show that kind of vulnerability. He could not believe it. He did not want to believe it. At one point, he called for a sword, saying he wanted to deal with the matter himself. Some of the men around him were genuinely frightened by how undone he seemed. But then something shifted. The tears dried, the raving stopped, and what replaced it was something far more dangerous than grief. Henry VIII had a coldness in him that emerged in moments like this, a stillness that was more terrifying than any amount of shouting or crying. It had shown itself before, most famously when he had decided that Anne Boleyn had to disappear. The warmth would simply drain out of him, and what was left was a king who had decided what he wanted and was going to get it. When that coldness took hold of Henry, the people closest to him knew that someone was about to be destroyed. Catherine was removed from her rooms and placed under custody. She was not yet told exactly what was happening, but she must have felt it coming, because those around her described her as terrified, barely sleeping, barely eating. At one point, she managed to break away from her guards and ran down the long gallery of Hampton Court Palace, screaming for the king, trying to reach him before what was coming could be stopped. She never reached him. The guards caught her and dragged her back. Henry, who was in the chapel at the far end of the gallery, did not come out. That moment, a teenage girl running and screaming down a palace corridor for a husband who refused even to look at her, is one of the most disturbing images from that entire period of English history. Culpeper and Derham were arrested. They were taken away and interrogated with the kind of thoroughness that left no room for dignity or silence. Under that kind of pressure, men said things they might not otherwise have said, and the picture that emerged gave the King's Council everything it needed. Both men were condemned to death. Culpeper because he had friends in influential places and because his family held some standing at court, was beheaded, considered the more merciful form of execution. Derham, who refused to confess to having had any kind of romantic relationship with Catherine after she became queen, was treated far more brutally. He was hanged and then subjected to the worst kind of death that English law had available at the time. His refusal to cooperate had cost him everything. Jane Boleyn, the woman who had arranged the secret meetings, was also arrested. She appeared to collapse completely under the pressure of her imprisonment and interrogation, becoming so distressed that some people at the time questioned whether she still had her full mental faculties. It did not save her. She would face the same end as Catherine. Catherine herself was handled through an Act of Parliament, a law passed specifically to condemn her without the need for a proper trial. This was not unusual for the era. It was in fact a convenient tool for a king who wanted results without the complication of legal proceedings where things might not go exactly as planned. The act declared her guilty and sentenced her to death. There was no courtroom, no opportunity to speak fully in her own defense, no real moment where the truth of her situation could be fairly presented and examined. She was simply condemned. In the days before her execution, Catherine was moved to the Tower of London. She was kept in rooms that were comfortable enough by prison standards, but she was surrounded by guards and completely cut off from any real hope. The people who attended to her during those final days said she was very frightened, but worked hard to calm herself. She knew what was coming and wanted to face it with whatever courage she could gather. The night before she died, Catherine made a request that has stayed in the memory of history ever since. She asked that the wooden execution block be brought to her room, and then she practiced. She knelt down and placed her head on the block, adjusting her position, working out the correct way to lay her neck, so that when the moment came, she would not stumble or embarrass herself. She rehearsed her own death like someone preparing for the most important performance of their life, because in a very real sense, that is exactly what it was. She wanted the last thing people saw of her to be grace and dignity. On the morning of February 13th, 1542, Catherine Howard was led to the place of execution, on Tower Green, a small area of ground within the walls of the Tower of London. She spoke briefly, saying what was expected of her in that moment, an acknowledgement of the king's justice and a request for prayers. She was still a teenager. She placed her head on the block and the executioner did his work. Jane Boleyn was executed immediately after her on the same morning. It ended very quickly, the way those things usually did. And then the court moved on, because the court always moved on. Henry was not present, he never was for things like this. The most important thing to understand about Catherine Howard's story, what stays with you long after you have heard all the details, is not the scandal or the politics or the dramatic ending. It is the simple and clear injustice of what was done to her long before she had made any choices of her own. Catherine Howard was exploited as a child. She was taken advantage of by adults who should have protected her when she was young, vulnerable, and completely without support. She grew up in an environment where no one was looking out for her well-being, and the damage done to her in those years was real and lasting. And then instead of being given time, care, and guidance, she was packaged up by her ambitious uncle and placed in front of the most powerful man in the country in the hope that she would be perfect. She was given a crown and a court full of enemies, and not a single person whose job was truly to keep her safe. The women around her had their own interests to protect. Her uncle cared what she could do for the family name, not what the experience might do to her. And Henry himself, who called her his rose without a thorn, had chosen her specifically because of how young and unworldly she seemed. He wanted softness and light and laughter, and was not particularly interested in the full human being that came with all of that. When things fell apart, Henry positioned himself as the victim. He wept, he raged, he let the world see his pain. But Henry had been through 4 marriages before Catherine. He had cast aside 1 wife, executed another, outlived a 3rd, and humiliated a 4th. He had bent every law and rewritten the religion of an entire country in pursuit of what he wanted. He was not a man who suffered without recourse. He was a man who, when his feelings were hurt, reached for the most powerful instrument he had and used it. And what he used against Catherine Howard was the full force of the English crown. She was a girl who made mistakes, but she made them in the way any young, inexperienced, and unprotected person might when thrown into an impossible situation, without preparation and without anyone truly on her side. She sought warmth and connection in the only ways she understood, and those ways were dangerous in her world, even though they would have been completely ordinary in any other life. The women who had come before her in that palace had warned anyone paying attention about what Henry did to the women he decided had failed him. Catherine, it seems, was not paying that particular kind of attention. Or perhaps she was, and she was simply too far in to find a way out. History has not always been kind in how it remembers Catherine Howard. She has sometimes been written about as foolish, reckless, or naive, as though the main lesson of her story is that she should have known better. But when you look at the whole of her life, from the unprotected childhood to the manipulated arrival at court, to the impossible position of being a teenage queen in one of the most brutally political environments in European history, the lesson seems far simpler and far sadder than that. She was a girl who deserved something far better. Better adults in the early years of her life. Better protection when she was placed in danger. Better counsel when she became queen. Better judgment from the man who called her his rose and then sent her to her death, because she had thorns after all, just like any real human being. Within 2 years of Catherine Howard's execution, Henry VIII married for the 6th time. A new woman, a new beginning, the old pattern continuing without interruption. And somewhere in the long gallery of Hampton Court Palace, if you believe in that kind of thing, a girl who never had the chance to grow old is still running, still screaming, still searching for a door that does not open and a mercy that never came.